Welcome to Independent Television. I'm delighted to have Tom Parker Bowles here to talk about his book, Cooking and the Crown, which takes us from Queen Victoria right the way through to the present monarch, King Charles III. Tom, welcome.
Hi, Geordie. How very nice to be here.
Well, we go back a long way with food.
We do indeed. You are my first boss. You gave me my first. I've literally for the last 3 weeks been talking about the book, obviously banging on about royal food and the rest of it. And every question starts, how did your food writing career, how did your career start? So I tell them the same story.
Tell us, 24 years ago, what happened?
24 years ago, good God. It was at a party in 2000. I think I was slightly merry, and I spotted you across the room. You'd just become editor of Tatler. And I thought, okay, fine. I'd just been sacked from my job, I think DDA, as a film publicist. And I quite like food. So I don't know why, and in some fit of inspiration, I totted up to you and said, would you like a food column? And you said, okay, give me 800 words, and we'll think about it. And it was about prep school food. I remember that wonderful cartoonist you had. Was he called? It wasn't Banks. It was Springs. And it was about the horrors and sort of filth of prep school food. And then thankfully like that, and I worked for you for another until you went to the Standard. So how long was that? 6, 7
2009. So that was
9 years.
Yeah.
9 years at Tatler, and 9 very happy years doing.
But what was obvious to me was that food wasn't just a whim for you; it was a passion.
Yeah.
Leaving your school, it seemed to be something which was a pulse for you. Tell us what lit that and how it happened.
Well, it's the same old story that I feel like it grew up in a very happy household. Very good food. My mother, no one believes it now, but she was bringing up 2 children. We didn't have a cook, which is boo-hoo. But it's the thing about cooking is it's great fun on a Saturday afternoon when you're cooking something for your friends, and you've got the football on, and you've got a glass of wine, and you've got all day to make it. But actually, from my experience too, when you're cooking for 2 young children, and they don't like this, don't like that, it's quite a bore. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day. But yet she was a good cook, a good basic cook of roast chicken and salads and scrambled eggs, and all that very English stuff. And we lived in the country, and my father was a good gardener. So all these things were all in place, the sort of building blocks that seasonal, local.
And this was traditional English food?
Traditional English food with it. We had no spice whatsoever in our upbringing. We didn't have curries. The only spice in the house might have been a tiny sort of old, dusty tin of curry powder for some disgusting coronation chicken occasionally, and a bottle of old Tabasco for Bloody Mary. That was the only spice. We'd go up to London to see my grandmother and go to Italian restaurants, Mimo, those sort of places, La Fontana. So we knew about Italian food, and we go on holiday for 2 weeks a year to Italy. So Italian food and English food, but it was all these, locally seasonal, all the buzzwords.
And she was following recipes or things she knew, and you were watching her?
No, she never followed a recipe, and I never really watched her at that point. No, she would put a chicken in it was always the Arga, the bloody Arga. And she would, cook chicken, and she would cook for us and cook dinner parties, and maybe someone might come to cook for bigger dinner parties. But anyway, it was all very nice and normal and happy and all the rest of it. And then when Sainsbury's arrived in Chippenham in 1980, it was like the ship in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Forget the local, the seasonal, the butchers, all that sort of stuff. We wanted Ice Magic and Angel Delight and, multi-packs of Monster Munch. This, for us, was like, the promised land. Forget all this lovely sort of seasonal stuff. Sainsbury's was the ultimate. But apart from that, we ate well. But then, obviously, sent off to prep school, and the food was so appalling, so abhorrent.
What were some of the horrors?
Oh, just, sort of... Breakfast was a study in sort of sadism. It was ice hockey puck, eggs, rock hard, greasy that tasted of fish, great scummy flaps of bacon, tons of sort of flabby fat, and great things of scum. Sausages that, not my expression, but to use Jonathan Mease's expression, slurry-filled condoms, they weren't much more than that. It really was everything that I thought about food: fun, bringing people together, delicious. This was just horrible.
So how do you catapult into having lovely traditional English food, which was very unfashionable in restaurants, as people wanted to go to French restaurants or Italian like you did, to finding that to be a thread to your professional life?
Well, it gave me, it changed a normal appetite into greed, to the point I'd be nicking sweets, you know, for the masters. All I could think of smuggling back food. You know, the great treat was like being given I think they were called, not Barocco in those days, Redoxon. You know, we'd eat those. The only biology lesson I ever remember is when we were given a slice of white bread to see what saliva does to break it down. You know, and this was the most exciting thing. You know, white bread for a lesson. It really did it. So I can thank Summerfield's Summertown, Oxford, OX270N, for putting in me an absolute obsession with food. So yeah, that's what it taught me. Nothing much more than that.
So we come on to the Royal Cookbook.
Yeah.
And what was the technical things you had to go through to get permission from the Royal Library, from the King and the Queen?
Oh, first of all, 25 years of completely keeping away from royals, full stop. You know, apart from a recipe for my mother's roast chicken in Let's Eat, occasional, you know, when I'm promoting the book, saying yes, my mother likes roast chicken and she likes fish, but really keeping it away because, you know, it's not church and state separate. But you know, if I'd immediately gone, right, I'm doing a royal cookbook, you know, it would have seemed a little bit sort of, I'm not a baby anymore, I'm not even that, I'm nepo middle-aged perhaps, you know, into this. So I thought 25 years pretty much of food writing, quarter of a century, I just about built up enough to be able to say, okay, well, it's interesting enough, royal cooking. And my mother gave me a book about 20 years ago called Royal Chef. He was a Swiss guy called Gabriel Schumi. And he started as a sort of a trainee and under chef in Queen Victoria, towards the end of Queen Victoria's reign, in her kitchen. And he went through Edward VII, George V, and ended up as royal chef to Queen Mary. Now, this was fascinating. As a food geek, as a food book collector, as someone who's obsessed with food on every single level, that's what really piqued it. I wasn't really that interested, to be honest, in not what the late Queen ate, because this was originally from Queen Victoria to the late Queen. So that gave me a degree of separation, because I'd only met, everyone assumes, especially in America, that we all live in one big castle together, you know, the whole royal family, you know, hey, morning, morning, which is obviously entirely untrue. So when it was from Queen Victoria to the late Queen, Queen Elizabeth, it was removed. I'd met her twice, you know, once when I was 8, was so scared that I curtsied rather than bowed. And the second time was when, in my mother's wedding at Windsor, and my sister and I think had sneaked out for a fag or something and got lost. And suddenly heard this voice, "Are you okay?" So I looked around, oh God, you know, yes, man, oh God. You know, and you know, obviously she was utterly sort of magnetic and lovely, and she was the Queen, the most famous person in the world. We just followed like two rather terrified but awestruck puppies as she went down the hall with the dogs, and you know, this absolute eye for detail, and why haven't you done, you know, it was just incredible. We still remember this sort of 4 minutes of, so that was it. So there was a big degree of separation. And then obviously when she very sadly died, things got a little bit closer to home. And as you'll see in the book, there are about 4 or 5 recipes from my mother and the King and Queen, but the vast majority are,
Yeah.
you know, Victorian.
Let's talk about the 4 recipes. So take us through your mother's recipes.
There's a recipe for my mother's scrambled eggs. No, I don't think that's anything.
Because Marco Pierre White used to say the sign of a good chef, any good cook, is scrambled egg to get the right texture.
I mean, scrambled eggs have to be done slowly. I mean, I think I probably got that from her, in that if you do them too fast, they get tight and they become slightly sort of school dinners.
And no milk.
You don't need milk, salt, pepper, fresh eggs. But we used to get eggs we used to come back from holiday. In those days, nothing was open in the country. You didn't have 24-hour garages. Go and get the eggs from the chickens, which my parents kept. And then there was always butter in the fridge, and there was always, salt and pepper, and that was it, and some bread that was probably from the freezer.
So the Queen with her wooden spoon
which wasn't Queen then, but yes, with her wooden spoon, very slowly over the low heat of the Arga, just chucking it in. There was no thing, and it's a really good slow 20-minute scrambled eggs recipe, and you get those nice, rich, luscious curds rather than sort of mean lumps.
So the second recipe?
Second recipe there's actually there's 3 from my mother. I mean, these are revolutionary, these recipes. The second one is because it's set into breakfast, lunch, tea, dinner, puddings. And the second one is her porridge, which I mean, really are. This is like Heston and Blumenthal stuff here. Her porridge, which she eats every day in the winter with her own honey. She has beehives, which Fortnum Mason very kindly go and collect and put it into pots and sell it for charity once a year. So there's porridge, there's scrambled eggs, you know, this is not... And then there's one more recipe for her broth. It's a chicken broth at lunch. If you want a light lunch, chicken broth with vegetables, it's very easy if you've got stock or consommé.
So it's simple foods.
Very, very simple food. And it's the same with the kings. I was quite conscious of not stepping over any line into privacy, not, you know, crossing over, and everything was checked back to...
And with the kings, these aren't things he's cooked, these are things he likes.
There are a couple of dishes that he likes. So there's a green omelette, because he loves eggs, which has got Gruyere and all sorts of lovely things like that. There's Uftrum Kilber, that's not really the king's, it's actually the Queen Mother's recipe, which is sort of more of a rich recipe, lobster and prawns and tomato and mayonnaise. And then I'm trying to think what else the king's, anything else there. There are Birkhall scones, Birkhall's house, but again, that's taken from other recipe books, because obviously, the king and queen give a lot of recipes.
So what if, people might think that it's going to be banquet food. It's actually quite cookable food. That's what I took from this book.
Well, that's the point about the book, is that everyone imagines lark's tongues and...
Which you haven't had.
Which I haven't had, and signet, very signet, but the great thing is, the two great eaters, now it's all changed now, the king and queen now, eat like we eat, sort of well and healthily and, all the rest of it. But the great eaters, and the vast majority of the book is about the great, is Queen Victoria, who, of course, contemporary accounts will always describe as, the queen eats like a bird, obviously in Craig Brown's sort of forelock tugging prose. And of course she wasn't. She was very, very greedy. It's a fantastic book called The Greedy Queen by Annie Gray, a food historian, and goes into it. And she ate. And in those days, you'd have 12 dishes for breakfast. You'd have 8 to 12 courses for lunch. You'd have 10 to 14 courses for dinner.
It's almost a tragedy. We've moved.
I know. And then you'd have tea. And so there are only two things that endure. And of course, Edward and Victoria, they had 45 chefs in the kitchen, truffles and cream and all sorts of wonderful things. And Edward VII, the great trench man of all time, his favourite dish was snipe, tiny little wading bird, deboned, covered with foie gras force meat, wrapped in pig's caul, panade, i.e. breadcrumbed, grilled, then covered in a Madeira and truffle sauce. Now, he could eat these by the dozen. They took 8 hours to make.
Not in your book.
No. So there's lots of talk about those, turtle soup. What I look for, the recipes we could cook. So, for example, Edward VII, the great gourmand, but he loved roast beef and Yorkshire pudding and the rest. George V, his son, who was much more sort of serious and perhaps slightly drier character than his father, he really liked plain food, mashed potatoes. So one of the recipes I found going through the research was called œuf Suzette, and it's basically a baked potato. You bake it, scoop out the middle, mix it with butter. You line the inside of the baked potato with ham, put back the buttery potato, put a poached egg on top, cheese, grill it. So that's what I was looking for. I was looking for dishes that I wanted to eat.
But the occasions when the King, as Prince of Wales, has given great dinners for charity or for entertaining for the nation, there's an attention to detail about food. Food is almost like a soft diplomacy for him, compared to Buckingham Palace when the Queen was there, where it wasn't something which was so delectated over.
Well, this is the thing is, you might think that, but actually the whole thing of the two things that endure, now the 12-course dinners have gone, the cream and the truffles and the foie gras obviously totally gone now. So, state banquets are 3 courses rather than 10 to 12. But the two things that endure from Victoria through to the King these days is, number one is tea. Everything stops for tea. Tea is still a major meal, and we're talking about, the English idea of tea, i.e. a meal between lunch and dinner, supper, high tea, whatever you want to call it. Cake, still cakes, biscuits, sandwiches, potted shrimps. It is a feast unto itself, and that's still there. And back to the state banquets, soft or souffle diplomacy. This is where, the royal family never have got to choose who comes. Well, Victoria probably did. But it's a government choice. So there have been some interesting characters over the years.
But where the King has got an advantage is he's so interested in from farm to fork, from organic food, for having an interest in how everything is grown, where it's things are fed, what sort of fertilizer is or isn't used. So it's a thread through his life. Can you take us through food with him?
Well, he's always been way ahead of his time, and I'm not qualified to comment on any other part of his many, many interests and areas of expertise in architecture and all the rest. But food, that's what I do. And he was way ahead of his time on sustainability, on regenerative farming, on rare breeds. When he took over the Rare Breeds Survival Trust, which is fantastic, there were a lot of our great breeds of cow and pig and chicken and goat disappearing. Heritage varieties of fruits and vegetables. Now, there's an amazing place called Brogdale. It's a national seed collection in Kent. It has not just the seeds, but it has all the different cherry trees, because we have hundreds of different kinds of apple trees and pear trees. And anyway, it is a treasure trove, one of the great collections in the world of our fruits. And anyway, Mrs. Thatcher in the 80s saw it slightly differently and saw this great swathe of land that was at that point owned by the government, and thought, well, why are they keeping all these silly trees and boring seeds? We'll flog it off, and nice bit of development land. Of course, the King, then Prince of Wales, heard about this, got the money together from the Duchy and him, and bought it. Now, this is, if you're a food geek like me or have any interest whatsoever in heritage fruits, this is the ark, this is the mother stone of everything. And, he bought it without, I only found this out talking to him a few weeks ago. I said, why didn't you shout about that? This is something incredible. Oh, no, it was just... And that for me sums it up. He just gets on with it and does it quietly. Farmers, most of my job is travelling around, talking to producers, talking to farmers, not in the cities, but out in the country. Now, he's a food hero among farmers. The countryside fund he had, which when farmers are in problem, foot and mouth, BSE, all these issues that have happened, it's there to give immediate money. He is, a king of the countryside and the cities as well, but he really is, in terms of food, you speak to any farmer, any producer, they all think he's amazing.
What did you learn through the recipes and the food which the different monarchs have about the personalities? And did things come through of parsimoniousness or greedy?
Oh, greed with Queen Victoria. She liked to eat, and she was a gobbler, as her uncle said. So what happened in those, the banquets, is at the moment the monarch had finished their plate of food, their sort of, whatever it was, sort of goujons or lamb cutlets or some amazing French confection, the plate was taken away. So Queen Victoria ate very, very fast. So you had to eat very, very fast to keep up with it. The plates would be grabbed away, as you ate. Edward VII was a huge bon vivant, loved his food. He didn't just have all these 5 different meals. He'd have 11s of turtle soup. Now, turtle soup took 20 hours to make, starting with, procure a fine, fat, lively turtle. He would have, his tea, then he would go to bed with a roast chicken and sandwiches. His appetites were hearty in every way. He was sort of one of, and also what I found out, he was he's always seen as a slightly dilettante playboy, but actually when he became king, he was an incredible diplomat. The Jane Ridley books, which are amazing. I'd never read a royal biography in my life, but the Jane Ridley re-examine Edward VII, who everyone thought was just stamps and shooting, and Edward VII, who was just seen as this sort of playboy. And actually, Edward VII and George, they still kept Europe together, because, of course, Victoria was the grandmother of Europe, and the Kaiser and the Tsar and everyone, they're all related. So it was a very delicate balancing act those kings did.
You have your own, I believe, ways of making sure that you don't eat endlessly, otherwise you'd be twice the size. And do you, and I believe you only have wine, say, 3 days a week.
Yeah, gosh, I mean,
what is your regime?
My regime is appalling. I mean, most people eat normally. You start off in this food world, young and fit and healthy, and drink. You can do long lunch and a long dinner. I can do about a long lunch about once every 3 weeks now, and I'm suffering afterwards. A sort of 2-bottler. But you try. It started off with drink. You start with 2 days not drinking, and 3 days. I'm pushing for 4 days not drinking now. And doing all sorts of gassy exercise. Doesn't do much, but it sort of keeps the doctor happy. But you can't. You see, as food critic, it's sort of par for the course that all sorts of sort of blood pressure, cholesterol. I haven't quite succumbed to gout yet, but I'm sure it will happen. It is. You saw, I think it was Pete Wells in New York, who actually gave up the great job of food criticism for the New York Times. He just said, "Look, I can't."
So isn't the free pass for today Ozempic?
I did try it. And I went to my doctor, and I said, "Can I have some of this Ozempic stuff, please?" And he just went, off. Because apparently, you know, it's this thing that you feel sick all the time when you have it. And I just thought it was easy. And anyway, he says, you know, it's not to be abused. It's for my serious people. He said, do more exercise, eat less, drink less. And that was that. No, Ozempic. No, you can't be a food critic and have Ozempic as well, because I think it curbs your appetite.
And do you despair slightly at the diet of chemicals in so many quick, fast takeaway foods?
You know, it's balance, isn't it? It's not for me to start wagging my finger and saying what people should.
You like a burger as much as the next
I
person.
love McDonald's, I love Monster Munch, I love Scampi Fries, I love Crunchies and Double Deckers. I mean, Britain leads the world in corn-based snacks.
And Beethoven was alleged to have said that only the pure in heart can make a good soup. Do you think there's a judge of character on what people can do and you can?
No, I think you could be an absolute and be a good cook. I think that's the truth. No, I think Beethoven could say what he wanted. He was rather talented, but no, only the pure in heart can make a good soup. No, I think it's quite easy to make. There's some good soups in the book actually. No, that would put off a lot of people if you would be pure heart. You know, sort of food as sort of confession or something like that.
Now, I'm expecting this is going to be a great Christmas bestseller. So, Christmas, what will be your Christmas? What will be on your plate?
Beef, not turkey.
And who will be cooking it? Where will you be? And what comes with the beef?
What comes with it is usual. Every Christmas I go back to I have it with my children and my ex-wife. Go back to their house and sit in my tracksuit bottoms and t-shirt and cook. We have delicious roast beef. Pete Hannon's, who's the meat merchant, fantastic Glenarm beef. A rib of that, Yorkshire puddings, a whole thing on Christmas Day, and sit. We don't go to church. The best thing about Christmas in London, which is something I've only done over the last 8 or 9 years, you go to the pub while in the oven. Go to the pub, meet a few friends, go back, eat lots of beef and roast beef and no Christmas pudding, no turkey.
Because you don't like Christmas pudding?
I don't like Christmas pudding, man. I don't hate it. I just don't like. There's a very good recipe for the Buckingham Palace one in there, by the way. But if you like it, wonderful. But beef, turkey, awful. Victorian Arrive East. I mean, I slightly blame Queen Victoria for popularising, and Dickens for popularising turkey over goose or boar's head or something like that. No, Christmas is. I think everyone expects us all again to be.
But as you wake up to a great beef feast, let's hope many people will be waking up to, in their stockings, Tom's new book, which is a absolute delight of very useful, cookable dishes, as well as some incredible anecdotes and insights into our royal family.
It is, well, yeah, historically and the rest, but yes, you hope it's going to be battered and bruised. And, I like all the recipes in there, and I'm greedy, and if I like them, I hope that other people will like them. It's not the roast signet, it's not the lark's tongue and aspic, it's proper recipes taken from, I suppose, nearly 200 years of royal cooking.
Tom Poggeballs, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Geordie.